I'll try not to have too much of my Israeli Texan accent show through. Thanks, Peter, and thanks you all for having me here. As Peter mentioned, some of the work for this book he unknowingly uncovered starts about 7 years ago, almost to the day, with September 11th, 2001. And we all know that that day had a lot of impact on a lot of us. My co-author and I, Rod, we got on the phone, we talked about we wanted to make a difference, do something to change the world after 9/11. And we knew that we wanted to do something, but we didn't know exactly what we could do. And when we thought about it, we realized that we understood two things, or we thought at least that we understood two things: businesses and social networks. So we had this grand idea of starting a huge nonprofit of CEOs working for peace and economic development. And we had this big idea for a conference kind of like this, with thousands of people coming on the anniversary of September 11th in 2002. So we start planning this conference, and we start moving and moving and moving. And our first conference, we had a great sign-up rate. 12 people signed up. And we had a big oy vey moment. And we realized that there was one thing that we could do, and it actually went back to our experience in business school. And a lot of people don't know this, but Stanford Business School, the most popular class there, is actually called Touchy-Feely. And what it is that, and a lot of you are familiar with it, it's basically tea groups. So for 6 hours a week, MBAs get together in groups of 12 and talk about their feelings and share their feelings, how they feel about each other, about themselves, about the world. And it's just a very intense and positive experience for everyone that goes through it. It's actually the most subscribed to class in the school. And we said, what if we have a form of touchy-feely with the CEOs? So that's indeed what we did. And what happened is that the experience was so powerful for them, just being able to share their experiences. We had people from all over the world, that they decided to actually replicate and have more touchy-feely-esque type discussions with each other all over the world. And we had Israelis and Palestinians, and Americans and Saudis, and Pakistanis and Indians. And the organization started to grow that way. And very organically, these circles started popping up all over the world. And funders, meanwhile, were asking us, what is your strategy? Who's in charge of this network? We said, well, there's no one really in charge of this network. It's organic. It's all about member participation. And funders calling you on the phone asking you what you're doing is one thing. Your mother calling you on the phone asking you what you're doing is another. And my mom, Ori, what is this thing with the circles? So we say, well, it's really, Mom, about giving the circles power to just be creative. And some of the circles indeed were able to achieve some remarkable results. The biggest one is probably the India-Pakistan circle. The Indians were invited by the Pakistanis to go visit the country. The borders were closed. They got special permission from Pakistan. When they landed, former dictator or prime minister, however we want to think of him, Musharraf was there, and said, with this flight, I hereby open up the borders. And the borders between India and Pakistan were opened for the first time in years. So there's now direct flights from the two countries. And the same people that said, what were you guys doing talking about your feelings there, came back to us and said, how did you achieve this? And we said, we didn't really achieve this. It was the power of the network. It was the power of people getting together and doing remarkable things because they were free to experiment, because there was no structure, because there was flat hierarchy. And in trying to explain what we did, we actually went back in history. And I know I grew up in Texas, but I now live in San Francisco. So I want to talk to you about men in red tights. And I want you to meet Hernan Cortez, who in 1519 shows up in present-day Mexico City. And at the time, it was run by the Aztecs. Tenochtitlan was the biggest city in the New World. In fact, when Cortez shows up, he comments about how the city is even bigger than Seville. There's markets there. there's pyramids, there's roads. The entire place is incredibly well run. And really, Cortez isn't there to do any sightseeing. He's there to get one thing. He's there to get gold. So he says to the Aztecs, he says, take me to your leader. And they said, fine, you can talk to Montezuma. And Montezuma had had a vision years ago that a god might show up in his city. And he thought this might be an incarnation of this vision. And Cortez goes to Montezuma and says, I want you to give me all your gold, or I'm going to kill you. So Montezuma says, well, there's a vision going on, and sometimes you have to follow. So he gives him all the gold and says, just keep me alive. Unfortunately, Cortez wasn't a man of his word, and he kills Montezuma. Not only that, but over the next 2 years, he starts attacking the entire Aztec civilization. In 2 weeks, what he did is he blocked off all the roads and all the bridges and all the aqueducts as well, into the city. So you're having 200,000 people starve within 2 weeks. And over 2 years, the Spanish army, and again, these are only 60 people, the Spanish army is able to get effective control of the entire Aztec empire. And it's remarkable. So by 1521, they have effective control over the Aztecs, and then in 1532, they do the exact same thing with the Inca. And 2 years to completely decimate the entire civilization. By the end of the century, the Spanish have effective control over the entire South continent. And with the winds of victory in their back, they show up in the American Southwest, kind of where I grew up near El Paso. And encounter an Indian tribe that was, by a lot of ways, a lot less sophisticated than the Aztecs. So the Apache tribe, unlike the Aztecs, did not have any pyramids. They didn't have any roads. They didn't have any great structures. But the Spanish by now had their formula down, right? Give us all your gold, show us your leader. So they said, give us all your gold, and the Apache says, we don't have any gold. So they said, well, okay, the next best thing is you can adopt our lifestyle. You can become farmers. Show us your leaders. But the Apaches said, we don't have any leaders. In fact, the Apaches, what they have are people called Nantans. The most famous one in history is probably Geronimo. And the Nantan, unlike Montezuma, who was very much a top-down kind of a guy, the Nantan's led by example. The word you should doesn't exist in the Apache language. So if you follow Nantan, let's say, Peter, you're a Nantan. If you want to follow Peter, that's great. If you don't want to follow Peter and you'd rather follow June, that's great as well. So again, the Spanish have the formula down now. And what they do is they go to Nantan and they kill them. What happens is that when one Nantan gets killed, another one just takes his place. So the next thing that the Spanish do is they burn down a lot of the Apache villages. But all that does is it actually makes the Apache even stronger because they become nomadic. And that the harder that the Spanish fought them, the stronger the Apache became. And this is incredibly counterintuitive. The Apaches were able to have raids against the Spanish. They were also able to survive attacks by the Mexicans and by Americans. And here's the Apache territory when the Spanish first encountered them. And here's 200 years later, after attacks by the Spanish, the Mexicans, and the Americans. Their size nearly doubled. It was never their intention to do so. But the harder that the Spanish fought, the stronger the Apaches became. And it all comes down to one thing. It comes to the difference between spiders and starfish. If you take a spider, I had a friend when I was 3, and it was kind of, I wonder whatever became of him in Israel. He would sit down in preschool and would just take legs off ants. And it's all he did. He wasn't really interested in Play-Doh or anything like that. His name was Danny. And Danny, wherever you are, I'm sorry. I hope it's not jail. But so Danny would sit there and do this for ants all day long. And we know that if we cut off the leg of a spider, then you're going to have a disabled spider on your hands, right? And if you cut off the head of a spider, you're going to kill it. Right? Nothing too extreme there. But what happens when you cut off an arm of a starfish? Well, the starfish, unlike the spider, does not have a central head. The starfish does not have a brain. Each one of the arms of the starfish have the organs that are capable of sustaining that entire starfish organism. If you cut off the arm of a starfish, most species will actually grow an arm back. Not only that, but in a lot of species, like the Lynchia, the arm will form an entirely new starfish.